Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today I want to share with you the books that I have read in January, and spoiler alert, that hasn't been like that much to be fair, so I think this might be a short and sweet video. We will see whether I can actually hold myself to that. Before we go into the individual books that I have read, I want to talk to you about some stats that mainly have to do with my goal of reaching a 0 TBR this year. So we will see whether I made any progress towards that goal in January, and then I will give you the individual book reviews. Okay, so for these stats, the first one that is important is the number of books I had at the beginning of the year on my TBR, and that was 37 books. Then the next three important numbers, the first one is how many books have I read, and that is 4. I only finished reading 4 books in January, which is very low for me, but also something that seems to be happening in Januaries. I just come out of this like really high in December, and then just like life hits me in January and I just don't really read a lot. That's quite normal. Then we have the number of books that I have bought, and this includes gifts. Now, since January is my birthday month, this one is a bit high, and it is 9 books. I received 9 books in January. Some of them I bought, some were my birthday gifts. And last but not least is the number of books that I have borrowed from the library in January, and that has been 1 book that I still had left over from books I borrowed last year, but since then I have returned this book unread, so it is officially off the TBR again. And then one last thing to keep in mind, that one of the books that I have read and finished in January is a reread, so that one did not reduce my TBR. So if we add that all together, I read 4, I received 9, and 1 was a reread. We land at 6 books added to my TBR in January. So we are currently actively working like away from my goal of reducing my TBR, but that's fine. Like, I expected that. I knew that I would probably get quite a few books for my birthday, so I'm not mad about it. And my current TBR is at 43 books, so now we can start slowly working to get under 40 again. Okay, so that's it for the stats. Now let's talk about the books. And the first book I finished in January was said reread, and that was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. This was the first Celeste book I have ever read. I since have read all of her novels and I've given all of them 5 stars, and this one is no exception. Even on the reread, I absolutely loved this book, even though it is like heart-wrenching. In this one, we follow a family that is Asian American. The father is Chinese American and the mother is white. They met in college, got married, had children, and we are now set during like the 70s, and the children are teenagers. And at the beginning of the book, in the first chapter, we learn that the oldest daughter, Lydia, has disappeared, and at the end of the first chapter, we learn that she has been found dead in the lake. That's kind of like the cover in a way. So yeah, this is kind of like a mini mystery, because it is kind of about like what happened to Lydia, but it's much more like a family drama, especially looking at the question of race and how this affected this family, the way that racism made life really hard for these people. And yeah, it's just phenomenal. Such a gut-wrenching read. It is like so visceral, and you really feel for all of these characters, and you can see them with all of their flaws and all of their hopes and dreams. And this book explores so deeply how parents can kind of transfer their dreams onto their children, and how damaging that can be, that these children might never be able to form their own dreams, and how that makes life so hard for them. And then also kind of like the trauma that can come from like family and parents and their decisions that they make, especially if you as a child are too young to really understand what's going on, and how that can really impact your life. And so with all of that, this is just such a meaningful read to me, because like to some parts of that I can relate, and other parts, yeah, are just like interesting to read about and just important to think about. And I love this book. So I'm gonna stop like rambling on about it and just like encourage you to pick this one up. Then the next book I finished was an audiobook, and that was Sorceress Comes to Call by Kingfisher. And this is a fairy tale reimagining of the Goose Girl. In this one, we have two main characters. We have a young girl whose mother is a evil sorceress, and the kind of like power that her mother has is that she can take over our main character's body in a way and use her like a marionette in a way. And then we have an older woman whose brother is kind of like the intended of the sorceress. She's trying to marry the brother to get like a good standing in society and have money and all of that. And obviously this sister main character, she doesn't really love that. She can see that there is like trouble coming with the sorceress, and so both of these main characters are trying to stop the plan of the evil sorceress. As always, I had a really good time reading this book. I do love T. Kingfisher books. I love her humor. I love her characters. She does a really good job with like shorter page length, but then also still like very fleshed out characters and an interesting plot. With a lot of her books, I have that issue that I feel like I always expect just like a little bit more from it than what I actually get. But this one actually came like very close to like my favorite ones. Like my all-time favorite one so far is Nettle and Bone. And I feel like this definitely had a similar vibe, with it being kind of gruesome and kind of dark, but then the humor and just the way it is like presented is lighter. And it's just a really good mix that always works for me. So I gave this one 4 stars. Then the next book I finished was an ebook, and that was Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second Mistborn novel, and I must confess that Mistborn is not going well for me. And with Well of Ascension, it was definitely a low. Like, I didn't love the first book, but the second one really was not it. It had like such terrible second book syndrome for me. If you don't know, Mistborn follows a world where the evil guy has won, kind of. So we have a lord ruler who is oppressing the people that live in this world. And in the first book, we have kind of like a heist scenario where a group of thieves is trying to topple the empire. And that kind of like heist scenario kind of kept me reading along. But with the second book, because of what happened in the first one, we leave that like heist scenario like far behind us, and now it is more like the question of we have a city, we have like armies that are trying to attack the city. Now what do we do? And it's just basically all of our characters sitting around in that city being like, what shall we do, while all of the armies are sitting outside of the city being like, well, we're just gonna wait for them to starve to death. And it's just exactly as interesting as it sounds. Which is not interesting at all. Like, I was so bored with this book, and I know that a lot of people love these characters, and unfortunately I have to say that I don't. I really just don't care at all when like important characters in this series die, which happens sometimes. I feel nothing. I feel like emptiness inside of me, and that just shows that these characters to me are not real. While I'm reading it, they always remain characters, just like paper cutouts that are moving through this world, if you know what I mean. Sorry if you can hear like my floor. It's like very noisy, like floor. I'm trying a new setup for this video. Let me know what you think. Maybe it's more interesting, but maybe it's also more annoying. I don't know. So yeah, this book was just not it for me in like no regard. I gave it 3 stars, which just reflects that it was boring. And then we're already talking about the last book that I finished reading in January, and that was Fool's Errand, the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy by Robin Hobb. And this is a return to Fitz and the Fool, which I was really looking forward to. Last year I have read the Life of Traders trilogy, and that follows like different characters in a different part of the world in the realm of the Elderlings. So now finally returning to Fitz, and especially the Fool, who's probably like my favorite character in this whole thing. It was so good, and this book is just such a great reintroduction into like Fitz and the Six Duchies and what is going on with all of that. So yeah, in this one we follow Fitz like many years after what happened in the first trilogy, and he is kind of trying to live a quiet life. He is trying to keep himself away from danger, but also from the people he loved. And so he is kind of like in this like in-between space where he isn't really happy, but he's also not really unhappy. And yeah, as we can imagine, things happen that slowly pull him back into what is going on with the Six Duchies and with the Foreseers, and he has to kind of step back into that life that he left behind. This also comes with some losses, but also he finally has the chance again to be with some of these people that he loves and that he sacrificed so much for. So this is very much like nostalgic, especially in the beginning where nothing really happens, but we just have some of our characters finally come back together again after so many years, and they're kind of like catching each other up and telling each other what has happened in between and all of that. So yeah, this was just really, really lovely. It's just exactly why I love reading Robin Hobb. It's like the complete opposite to what I just said. These characters feel so real. They're like basically people in my head. Like I cannot see them as characters. They must be real the way that they're written. And so even when like someone dies that I didn't love as a character, that sometimes annoyed me, it just hits so different. I was literally crying into my dishwater while doing the dishes because of this book. So yeah, Robin Hobb is just like the master of writing characters, and I love her for it. So I gave this one 4.5 stars. So I'm currently continuing both of these series, so I'm reading some very big fantasy books, and that's why I didn't really finish anything else. And then also I was just super busy this month. So even though 4 books isn't that great, I hope to do much better in February, but I still read 3 books I really loved, so that's great. And yeah, I would love to hear what you've read in January. What was your favorite book of the month? I would love to hear about that. Also leave a like if you enjoyed this video. It really helps me out, and if you want to, you can also subscribe. I would love to have you here, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye!